Most unlikely of villains, smooths of brain and for pause. Does it talk? Does it know how? Does it bottle? Does it meow? In the lair of the cerebral bore, and will show him so much more. We'll leave your brains at the door.
Welcome back to Cerebrivore. My name is Jason. I host the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Today is the third in our four-part series on time travel. These first three episodes come from the Safer Fantasy Crafting podcast. There are links in the show notes. Safer laid down the groundwork, and we're going to follow it up with a panel discussion about time travel in role-playing games. Today's episode actually gets in the nitty-gritty. Safer talks about ways to actually implement time travel in your role-playing games, and time, not as much theory as some practical ways to do it and his thoughts on doing it. And like I say, next week we'll be back with a panel discussion of experts. So at the end of this, Safer mentions that Anchor Apocalypse, for those of you that are just watching on YouTube or aren't aware, there's a podcasting app and service called Anchor. And Anchor is owned by Spotify. What happened is that that app used to have an ability to not only listen to podcasts through the Anchor app, but you could send messages to other podcasters through the Anchor app. And even people that didn't have a podcast could use the app to send a message, a voice message. And then we could play each other's messages. It was kind of like a audio blog where the messages would be the comments below and we could respond to each other. They've taken that feature away. Now, there are ways still to contact each other. You can actually still leave a message on the Anchor website if you go through the browser. And there'll be a link to Safer's podcast in the show notes, so you can leave him a message. As always, you can leave a message for Cerebrivore through our Anchor webpage, the web browser. You can leave it in the YouTube show notes. You can send an email to cerebrivore@gmail.com. If you attach an audio file, we'll play it on the air. We actually do have some listener calls that are waiting for us to answer. I'm waiting to get the panel back together to answer those calls. And I've set up a SpeakPipe account for Cerebrivore where listeners can call in using the SpeakPipe. You don't need an account or anything. You just click on the link in the show notes. It'll take you right there, and you click on a button. You let it access the microwave or the microphone on your phone, and it'll record right there and send us the message. So there are a variety of ways to reach us, and I hope you enjoy this, the third of the 4-episode time travel series. Take care, folks, and enjoy the show.
Warning. This podcast contains a thematically correct but specifically incorrect rant about Harry Potter. Thank you.
Time travel in role-playing games. An idiot's guide by Safer. Or is that a safer guide by an idiot? Why am I having to do this again? I've already recorded this a number of times. Can't you just use my previous recordings? I can't understand.
Dum 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 dum. Oh, give it a rest. Oh dear, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Sorry for anyone who's just randomly come across this podcast and suffered that introduction of mine. I'm sorry for anyone who's heard my earlier introductions on time travel and any of the mental anguish or oral damage you may have suffered listening to it. I'm just sorry. Yeah, it's been a bit of a delay getting this out. I did say that I'd probably have to script these podcasts, and I probably should have done that. In fact, if you say, did I actually attempt to script these podcasts? No, I didn't. Did I think about even scripting them? No. I just sat there hoping for some burst of energy to suddenly get me over the line with these, but it hasn't arrived, so I've just had to drag myself out and try and tie all this up and get it done with. I did realise that when I was thinking about what I was going to say on these podcasts, and I was thinking about things, my scatterbrain was all over the place, and thinking about things and then failing to write them down, and it was all up in the air. I realised that I still had my original notes that I sent to Jason Connolly at the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, and I realised that those notes are reasonably usable. I could probably just read through them and actually just get something out and get this whole thing finalised. So that's all I'm going to do, really. So I'm just going to read through the notes that I sent to Jason and see if they make any sense, and perhaps comment on them as I go. Okay, so let's get this done. Right. Methods and devices of time travel in RPGs. So let's start. Let's cut to the chase. Methods of time travel in RPGs can be a big headache for a GM. It's a headache for the same reasons it can be a problem in literature and storytelling. Unrestrained time travel can throw up paradoxes and inconsistencies. It can destroy many of the cornerstones of storytelling, and as storytelling is a major influence on many role-playing games, it can destroy the enjoyment of those too. Threat, suspense, jeopardy, choice, and the consequences that arise from those choices, and then the subsequent character development and story arc that comes from those consequences and development, can all be wiped away with time travel. I suppose that applies actually to games as well, not just stories. Considering that I view games as a hybrid, role-playing games as a hybrid thing, that are both stories and games at the same time, I think time travel can threaten gaming elements as well. So, jeopardy, choice, consequence, they're all part of gaming as well. And if you've got the ability to if you roll a dice and land on Mayfair with a hotel and you don't like it, you just go, I'm just going to roll the dice again then. Just go back in time and try it again. So, yeah, time travel can damage gaming principles as well as storytelling. But back to the text. Unrestrained time travel can turn the RPG into something closer to a video game, where the point is just the enjoyment of the effort and the challenge of the action moment, and the repeated grind to achieve a fixed goal. Time travel often creates a save-load function into a role-playing game. This can be desirable to some players, as the concepts of fate points and the do-over are essentially the same concept. A limited form of time travel can be used to justify or mechanize these concepts, as in Jason Connolly's idea of the players having a limited supply of coins that would be needed to operate the Bill and Ted phone booth. But an unrestrained time travel mechanism will quickly be abused by most players, and will rapidly turn the RPG session into a muddled and unsatisfying joke. I mean, this could be used in a parody-type game, but wouldn't hold people's attentions for very long, and would quickly go stale. Therefore, the golden rule that has commonly been used in literature and storytelling, and is also recommended for RPGs, is the method of time travel must be limited or even broken to stop it destroying the story, movie, book, or game. I suppose in that way, time travel devices and mechanisms could be used as a sort of diegetic method of introducing concepts like fate points and meta resources, rather than having them as a sort of abstract external concept. Something like a time travel device could put those within the setting and give it a bit more of at least a justification. This is where J.K. Rowling failed in her Harry Potter books, by introducing the time turners that could be used any time, without cost, without effort or danger, and were totally portable and could be used instantaneously. She realised her error later on and had them all conveniently destroyed before they could damage her planned grand finale. But still, I regard this as poor adolescent type storytelling. Yeah, it really grinds my gears that it was the point. I literally, in the third movie, when I saw Hermione pull out that time turner and use it, I literally stopped watching the movie at that point and just turned it off. And I've never watched a Harry Potter movie since. I never read the books. I found out about the what happened to the time turners rather conveniently, all burned together. You imagine that, something as powerful as time turners. They were all held in one place, had no backups, they weren't distributed around the world, they were all held in one place and they all just were destroyed in a fire or something. I mean, the wizards would be killing each other. Forget about Voldemort and Hogwarts. The wizards would be warring with each other over those things. They're that powerful. And I mean, Hermione, just her voluntarily giving the time turner back to them, you'd have to claw it from a dead hand. It's, it's such a useful thing, but no, I need to get off the J.K. Rowling, get a bit more positive. Okay, ideas about how time travel might be achieved was for a long time the preserve of magic, innate abilities, or supernatural phenomenon in literature and stories. I was surprised to find that the earliest idea of a time travel device or machine was in The Clock That Went Backwards by Edward Page Mitchell in 1881. The early ideas of time travel typically took the form of a time slip, where change in the protagonist's place and time occurs that is outside of the control of the hero or heroes. Time slips are the easiest type of time travel to include in an RPG because they are typically under the control of the GM and are often used just to introduce the adventure or to provide a change point in the game's events. In this way, the time slip works to take the role usually covered by the narrator of a story, where it just introduces the characters and sets the scene, and then takes no further part. A time slip used like this can therefore be considered similar to a MacGuffin or a quest giver. Time travel devices can also work in this way, and that is one of the reasons that many time travel machines in literature and film are restricted in so many ways. Examples of the time slip phenomena and limited time machines that act as the introducer of the adventurer but then take a back seat or have no further part include 1. The DeLorean in Back to the Future and Back to the Future Part 3. Significantly though, not the DeLorean in Back to the Future 2. The DeLorean is limited by speed and energy requirements and is sidelined for most of the first and third movies. It is significant that most of the discussions and disagreements about time travel that occur in Back to the Future revolve around the use or potential use of the DeLorean in the second movie. Number 2, the time holes in Time Bandits. Number 3, the time tunnel. Number 4, the warp device used in Barney's League of Eternal Guardians game. 5, the time machine in H.G. Wells' famous story. Wells sensibly has the Morlocks steal the time machine to prevent it taking any further part in the story, thereby forcing the protagonist to use more mundane adventuring methods. 6, the TARDIS in Doctor Who. The TARDIS is broken and unreliable on purpose. In many episodes it just deposits the Doctor and companion someplace and then isn't used in any really significant way until the adventure is over. 7. Bill and Ted's phone booth in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. A big limitation on the phone booth is Bill and Ted's own stupidity and lack of imagination. It is also limited by the dial-up code needed. I've read some fan sites that suggest that the 14-digit code used to program the booth would suggest that it is limited to about a 3 million years time range. It is also shown to be fragile and prone to malfunction. If it used coins, that would limit it further. I can't remember if it actually needs coins in the movies because I haven't actually gone back to review it. I've put a note here to say that the phone booth is not underused in Bogus Journey. It gets used very creatively in the time travel game at the end. But a time travel device used in this way in an RPG would quickly get out of hand and again just destroy all those storytelling elements that are often so important. A free-to-use time machine that can be used to get anything the players might need would destroy challenge and quickly become another farce. The Stargate that sends the adventurers to a fantastical world far away is hardly any different to the time machine time phenomena that deposits the adventurers somewhere in another place and another time. Using time travel this way is easy the most reliable and perhaps, I would say, the most recommended way of doing it. But it's also could be considered the least imaginative and perhaps a bit of a cop-out. 2 methods of time travel. I had the concept that most time travel examples fall into 2 categories. Of course, all categories can be mixed up and messed with. This is all make-believe. And those 2 categories are the time bus, or time photocopier, and the time tape recorder, time loop method. Now, the first, I'm going to talk about the time bus, or time photocopier method. Now, this method of time travel has become the most common method used and typically involves a device that can travel in both time and space. The time bus works by taking the heroes and transporting them to a different time and space. It doesn't have to be a device, it could be a warp hole or some other phenomenon. But the fact that it can move objects in space as well as time means that it can act as a photocopier and create multiple copies of the adventurers. This can obviously cause problems for a story and perhaps also be the basis of a story or game. But freely used in an RPG would likely result in the players creating multiple versions of themselves for every battle and situation, and result in what I'm going to call a million Martys problem. After Marty McFly from the Back to the Future. This is another reason why it is a good idea to keep time buses limited in some significant way, as they will quickly be abused by players. All of the examples that I gave in the previous section on time slips can be described as time buses. A GM could declare that copies of adventurers are not possible in their universe, and that as soon as the players arrive in the world by using the time bus, then any previous copies of themselves disappear from that timeline. Now, this is the difference between a time photocopy and a time bus. All time buses, all time photocopiers are time buses, but not all time buses are time photocopiers. There is the possibility that a GM could state that as soon as one version of yourself goes back into with the same time period, any previous versions of yourself that exist there would disappear. This would prevent multiple copies of the heroes being utilised within a scene. It could create some unique situations where, if, say, your character was walking down the street and you then go back in time and travel to the other end of the street, people witnessing this event would perhaps see you walk down the street and then suddenly disappear and reappear at the other end of the street, because only one copy of yourself can be present at any one time. A version of this actually occurred in that movie with, is it Malcolm McDowell? Or what was it called again? Yes, I've just had a quick Google. It's Time After Time, where he plays H.G. Wells. It's a bit of a mash-up movie, one of the earliest ones where it seems to have mashed up the genres, where it mashed up quaint time travel movies with psycho psycho slasher movies. It wasn't exactly a horror, but yeah, it's not a great movie, that, but there's an interesting element in it in that H.G. Wells travels back in time in his time machine in 19th century England. But when he materialises, he finds himself in a museum in the United States. Is it California? I'm not sure. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen the film. But that's interesting in that that is a time bus, because he's moved in space, but it's not a time photocopier because he hasn't created a copy of himself. He has actually travelled within the same physical space that the time machine occupies. So because he's moved in time forward in time, he's went to the same place where the device happens to be. So he doesn't travel forward in time in London. He doesn't just disappear in London and rematerialise in the London of the future like the 1960s time machine movie does. He actually travels forward in time to the place where the time machine actually happens to be in the future, in 1970s when it arrives. So that's an interest. So it's interesting in that includes some of the concept that I'm going to come to in the time tape recorder, in that he's moving backwards and forwards in time, but within the same dimension of existence, not his particular existence, not his consciousness, which is what I'll discuss in the time tape recorder, but within the same existence of the actual device. You just move to wherever the device happens to be. You get dragged over in time. This is a bit of a rabbit hole, and I'm rambling a bit. You can go on. You can be as pedantic as you want with this. I mean, the truth is, all time travel devices are kind of time busters in that if you move just in time and not in space, a pedantic, you could say, well, the planet's moving itself. We've got angular velocity, and it's moving through space. It's hurtling after the sun. It's going around the sun. It's not just going around the sun. It's not a flat disk or solar system. The sun itself is hurtling through space, and the planets are sort of rotating around it and chasing after the sun, creating a sort of... In reality, the sun and the planets make a sort of wobbly spiral movement through space. So you can be as pedantic as you like. You say, well, if I go forward 10 minutes, but I don't move in space, when I come out of the time travel process, I'll find myself in the middle of outer space, and the planet would have moved on a few thousand miles. So, yeah, more rabbit holes. But I suppose as a GM, you could just say, oh, get stuff, don't be so pedantic. You could say perhaps the other laws of physics apply, and that you continue with your angular momentum anyway, so you kind of follow the planet for a while. So perhaps, I don't know, you could be as crazy as you like with this. But no, I'm getting diverted. I'm going to get back to the text. So that idea of only having one version of yourself in any one time frame, having previous versions of yourself removed from the time frame as soon as you time travel into it. It could seem like a bit crude and heavy-handed, but it would certainly avoid any manipulations by the players and could create some interesting story ideas if existing versions of themselves suddenly disappeared from any one particular place. The caveat is also applied when time buses don't actually move in space. Imagine if you went forward in time in the TARDIS, painted it red, and then went back in time to when the TARDIS was blue. The TARDIS has not moved in space. So which TARDIS would exist in that time and space? Your new red TARDIS, or the previous blue TARDIS? Where does the blue TARDIS go? Is it squashed by the arrival of the new TARDIS? Is it vaporized, creating a paradox, as it could not then go forward in time to be painted red? Or is it replaced? Or are you in a multi-universe at that point? Wow, yep, you can really tie yourself in knots. So again, the best answer is leave it a mystery. Don't explain everything. Consider them things, and perhaps consider some responses and how you might want to deal with some things, but keep yourself agile and don't explain everything. You can also come up with other quick ideas in the heat of battle during adventure if you've not thought about this stuff. Like, for example, perhaps you could say the TARDIS cannot exist in the same space as another TARDIS. This would be a quick fix and perhaps would produce a red and a blue TARDIS standing alongside of each other. But that would again possibly lead to the Million Martys issue. Having a think beforehand about how your time buses work within the concept of how time works in your game can be useful, but as I say, don't overthink it or you will just fall into all sorts of rabbit holes. Know when to stop and just leave it to mystery. After all, it's all just make-believe, and you can come up with anything you want. This can also be the advantage of mixing the different concepts of time up within your game, as the multiverse can come to the rescue of any paradoxical situation. As a side thought, the simulacrum spell could be conceived in a way as utilising the time photocopier mechanism. A consequence of the time bus phenomenon is that the space and time within the bus itself is a separate place or dimension to the surrounding space-time environment, which goes back to what I was mentioning about the multi-universe and how the area of time travel in a multi-universe becomes its own separate dimension. Right, the next section is the time tape recorder or the time loop. This is a concept of time travel that occurs in movies like Groundhog Day and The Edge of Tomorrow. Now, I did write a note in I've put an extra note in here for Jason, saying that I knew that Groundhog Day was based on a TV episode of a Twilight Zone type series, but that I couldn't remember it, in which a guy was trapped in his lunch hour and nothing he could do could stop it. But I've actually found that now using Google, and it was a short film called 12:01 p.m. I think it was a Canadian movie from 1990. It's interesting that this short movie takes a pessimistic approach to the time trap that the guy's in, and sees the time loop as a horror, a purgatory that even death is not a release from. But Groundhog Day takes an optimistic approach that this means the hero is immortal and free to do whatever he likes without consequence. I think the significant difference of the two movies is the length of time the hero has to play with. The fact that Bill Murray has 24 hours to do things in Groundhog Day, whereas the protagonist in 12:01 p.m. only has the single hour, makes a significant difference of whether this is a heaven or a hell to the character. But getting back to the subject, the time loop is different to the time bus method in that only time is traversed. And it also is significant that the time travel occurs only within the frame of the hero's own consciousness. You can only go back to a time and place that you have already been to. This is of apparent limited use within a typical RPG campaign or setting, but is essentially what people do when they resort to the redo. And I suppose in that element, the time tape recorder acts as a sort of personal time bus, a non-photocopier version of the time bus. You are simply moving within the frame of your own existence. Now, this redo, it could be used in a game as a twist at the end to make the players go back and do the adventure again, but I can't imagine many people would thank a GM for that, unless they wanted to try and change the outcome. Makes the RPG very much like a video game. A better use would be having the escape from the loop the point of the game, so that the players have to find the solution to stop the looping process. This makes the RPG more of a puzzle than a game. Or you can have the players go all Bill Murray and just go crazy, apeshit and enjoy themselves. It could be a way of releasing status in a game, or fearful, cowardly play by simulationist players like myself, so that they don't worry about making a mistake because they can try another approach next time. In a standard campaign, this will be seen as a tedious waste of time and a retread, but if presented at the start, could be used as a novel conceit for a game. A time loop might be a bit more interesting if the players then use it to explore another location rather than go to the location that they have already failed in. If the players are not done with their characters yet, this could be utilised, I suppose. But most old schoolers would just roll up another character. I suppose the cheap trick of saying that the character's twin joins the party is a non-fantastical version of all of this. Now at this point the notes end and they just go into a list of suggestions for the third episode. Ideas for episode 3, how things can be described in time travel terms. Example, ghosts as echoes or phantoms from another time. Stroke dimension extending into this time. Time swaps. The Call of Cthulhu adventure in White Dwarf 81 has time denizens swapping places with each other. I've already mentioned that in the first podcast. Demonic possession as quantum leap style time travel. Quantum leap is a time bus, as the heroes could meet other versions of himself inside other people's bodies. He does not stay within his consciousness or personal time frame dimension. The importance and significance of related ideas about consciousness on time travel concepts. Ooh, that would be a real rabbit hole. And a last thought, a potential for sci-fi games to use real time travel concepts like faster than light travel, black holes, wormholes, gravitational bending of time. All bollocks, of course, because modern cosmology is bullshit. Oh, shouldn't have put that in. Time doesn't actually exist. It's just a product and property of a changeable three-dimensional space. Moving in time just means putting every atom and every energy configuration within a defined space back to the state that it was previously in. Easy, eh? Ho ho, this is some real heretic stuff right here. I could lose my physics A level for that. Okay, that'll do. Right, that's the end of my notes. That's what I wrote. I can't even really remember what I've just read about, really, so I think that's pretty much covered everything I was going to say about it. But I think the only other idea I was having, other ideas I was having, I was thinking that if you did conceive of a simulacrum spell as a sort of a dimensional swap, sort of taking a character out of another time dimension and dragging them into yours to create a copy of yourself to help you in your situation, could that have a sort of instant karma effect in that, say you have a boss fight with your enemy, and you drag a copy of yourself out of another dimension into your dimension to help with that fight. Perhaps in the dimension where you dragged the copy from, that copy was also about to have a boss fight with their big enemy. And all of a sudden, by dragging them out of their dimension into yours to give you an advantage, has simultaneously put the people in the other dimension, the team, the parallel team in the other multi-universe dimension, it's put them at a disadvantage because as you've suddenly gained an extra team member, the people in the other dimension have suddenly lost a team member. So perhaps there's some kind of universal karma balance element to time travel that you could perhaps put in your games as a theme. The only other thing I thought of is that this idea of differentiating time travel into two categories of time buses and time tape recorders. The only one that first comes to mind where I think there's some overlap in these concepts. The only example I could think of which seems to have both elements in it is actually A Christmas Carol. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. In that, I mean, Scrooge goes back into the past, and he revisits like a time tape recorder. He revisits his previous the events of that previously existed in his life. So he only views the time travel from his own conscious position. He can't go wherever he wants. He's just seeing his previous life events, but he does it in a way like a time bus, but as an ineffectual time bus, because he's created as a copy of himself, able to view the events of his previous life. So he's looking back on himself and the events of his previous life like a ghost, a phantom that can't actually interact with the previous events at all. Even though he's desperate to change them, he can't change anything about it. He's trapped in a fixed time continuum loop. But I don't know how that would be possibly useful or used in a role-playing game. I'm just spitballing and brainstorming here at this point. Oh, I have thought of one thing extra I did want to say. I did mention when I started these podcasts that I want to present these ideas and thoughts as a technique for a GM to be able to think quickly on their feet and be able to mix these ideas up in a way that's interesting and useful. And a way, there's a thing in Hot Tub Time Machine. Hot Tub Time Machine is not just some dumb movie. It's actually quite clever in a way, because there is a scene which combines these concepts of the time bus with the time tape recorder concept of time travel in the same scene. So the famous scene where they go into the bathroom, they don't realize they've traveled back in time, and they walk into the bathroom and they see themselves in the mirror, and they realize that they see their younger selves in the mirror, even though to themselves they look still like the old versions of themselves. So they themselves have both traveled back in time using the time tape recorder method, because they've gone back into their previous selves. They've gone back within their own previous conscious existence, but they've also gone back in time between themselves as their older selves. So it's both a time bus and a time tape recorder. But what's even more funny is the awareness that the film has of this, because the young lad that's come with them through the time travel, he's still standing there and he hasn't changed. He's still his teenage self as he was in the future. And the older fellas who are now young kids again, they look to this young lad, the nephew, I think I can't remember the name of the actor, and he says the joke, "Shouldn't you be a sperm or something?" And so there's that realization that there's this differentiation in the methods of the time travel, that there's this one thing of going back within the frame of your own existence, but also going back as a version of yourself, copying yourself back into a previous existence that you didn't actually exist in. It's a really smart scene. It's a funny joke, but it shows that movie is actually quite smart. It's not a dumb movie. So I think I'll call it a day. As I say, I haven't scripted this. I've just rambled it out. I was waiting for another manic period to be able to get this out, but one didn't materialise, so I've had to drag myself along and just get this out. If I think of any other things I might want to speak about in a third podcast, I'll perhaps put it together. God knows how long that would take. Could be months or years. If anybody has anything they want to talk about or ask me about or perhaps speak about in their own podcasts, I would be very keen to hear from them, either in messages to me or on their own podcasts. I think perhaps with the Anchor Apocalypse, messages are going to become a more rare thing in the future, and perhaps people are just going to have to address issues that they've heard in their own podcasts. But, okay, that's it. Perhaps it's a damn squib. I don't know. I hope you've enjoyed it. As it stands, this is the end. That's the end of my little adventure in time. I hope you've enjoyed it. Take care and enjoy your gaming. Bye-bye.
Leave anything for us?
Just bodies.
I'd just like you to start up your unit again.
Safer.
All it would take is you're coming back.
This was the last time.
Until the next time.
So make sure you tune into the next episode of Cerebrivore when a panel of experts show up to discuss time travel in role-playing games. Take care, everybody. Talk to you next week.
A Nerd Central broadcast, Cerebrivore podcast. Let's savor all the flavors from the simulcast. The all stars and pods past, Cerebrivore podcast. You're counting down your last as you admire them all. The zombies brain teeth, oh, so escaping your brain, but I need